Okay, so now let's look at some conclusions and see if we can draw some implications as well. So, born before the Civil War and dying before or by 1952, Dewey witnessed incredible changes in American society, living almost a century. He was a distinctly American philosopher who promoted what is known as pragmatic and progressive theory of education. He applies his pragmatic theory of truth to many areas of inquiry. I mean, for example, he even writes works on art and applying pragmatic theory to art and society and all kinds of other things. But he's especially known for applying it to education. And he's widely considered, again, the father of progressive education. His philosophy is deep and wide, writing some 20 books or more. And along with Peirce, his mentor, and William James, Dewey promotes this revolutionary approach to everything in life and society and government. He became a public intellectual figure. That is, he had wide acclaim and notoriety. In the 1970s and 80s, though, Dewey's ideas will kind of resurface. They had kind of fallen dormant for a long time, and not many people talked about Dewey, kind of was forgotten. New ideas had come along in education, and Dewey was forgotten. But in the 1970s and 80s, a kind of new emphasis, a neo-pragmatism had emerged, chiefly through the work of a guy named Richard Rorty, who is also one of the leaders of postmodernist thought. Rorty emphasized Dewey in his pragmatist theory, and that led to other interest in James and in Peirce as well. And so Dewey effectually argues for a kind of a unity of science approach to all human questions. He may not have used that exact term, but he thinks that all questions that we have are going to somehow or another fall underneath a kind of scientific empirical approach to knowing things. But what we find has to be kind of loosely held as just an approximation, and that has to be a continual reassessment all the time as things are going to move along. We're not going to worry about finding any kind of truth that kind of transcends all situations. It's kind of, and if you were in his shoes, it would kind of make sense. The blindingly successful fields of the hard sciences have given humanity so many advances in so many different areas, it would seem that the same empirical methods could be applied to all kinds of other fields of inquiry, and especially education. Some problems arise, though. If we only embrace truth claims because they serve our interest, then it follows that pragmatism is something that we embrace for the same reason. Maybe pragmatism itself is just a whole idea that we just embrace because it fits our interest, not because it's true, not because it's an actual description of the way things are. And if it isn't true, if it's just kind of an approximation itself, then you can see that there's a little bit of a self-defeating nature. There's a self-defeating dynamic that will always follow these theories of kind of epistemological pragmatism, which is related to an epistemological relativism. Now, here's some of the implications. If Dewey is correct, and the pragmatists are correct, then practical, technical, and democratized education will bring progress. But who gets to define what progress is? This is a problem with the whole utilitarian approach to things. Who gets to say what is good? Who gets to define what is good for most people? If utilitarianism, with which pragmatism has a close affinity, if utilitarianism is this idea that we do that which brings the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people, well, who gets to say what the greatest benefit is? Okay. Democratized education also, if he's correct, will endeavor to impose equal outcomes rather than maximizing the full potential of individuals. He wanted to balance those two things out, but I don't think you can come up with a theory that helps you to keep them in balance in practice. And for all of his emphasis on practice, this is a theory, okay? Dewey's emphasized individuals is true, but not at the expense of society. Ever trying to find a kind of Hegelian synthesis between extremes He argues that education must maximize the individual, but in the organic and social connections where a person lives and works and so forth. So this means too that curriculum must give room for the individual to find his or her unique place. Well, everyone is a philosopher of education in some way. I think everyone is a philosopher, and ultimately they're going to have a view for how a person should be educated, what that even is, how one prepares for life. Everyone is a philosopher of education because everyone develops ideas about individuals and society. You can't not have beliefs about these things if you're a rational adult. And we live in a society that gives us or forces upon us a basic level of public education based on its philosophy of education. And this education does incorporate some of Dewey's ideas. Usually upon graduating from high school, we must then choose whether to pursue work or more education. If we pursue more education, we must then decide whether we want to go kind of in a technical route and learn some type of vocation or a specific trade, or whether we want to go into higher education, perhaps as high as a doctorate, the terminal degree. These decisions lead us to kind of develop our personal philosophical approach to education to decide what education's purpose is for us. Well, then one day, perhaps we have children, as many people do, and then we have to decide this whole thing again. We must decide the purpose of education for a child who is not prepared to decide for herself. And again, we theorize about the purpose of education and try to put that into practice. And these are not easy decisions. Many factors come into the decision, right? Where are we and what educational options are even available? What can we afford? What should we emphasize in education? And so many people follow the status quo. Most people do, simply doing what others do, sending their children to public schools. If you follow the Deweyan philosophy, you educate a child for the moment, emphasizing the current organic social experience, and try to prepare the child for the exact kind of social context that they will enter. And this is the instrumentalist and pragmatist way, based on this naturalistic theory of human education and human nature. I mean, it seems practical. There is some overlap between pragmatism and practicality. But if you don't accept that vision, one may opt for some of the more classical theories of education, where wisdom for all ages enlightens and engenders the character and the virtue of a child. Now, we live in an age of hyper-flux. Our society is changing very rapidly due to technology, and this technology is coming down the pipeline at ever faster rates. There's technological shifts that happen at blindingly accelerating rates. By the time you teach a child something, it will become obsolete within a couple of years, okay? And that seems to be the situation that we're entering into, especially as we head off into an age of hyper-automation and artificial intelligence that will radically transform our society in ways that we really don't fully understand yet. So perhaps a classical approach to timeless wisdom, a classical approach that prepares the character and the virtues of the child, would best equip that child for whatever may come.